the biggest gaming disappointments of 2023. So I'm looking forward to seeing what's on this list because I've got my own too, and they may coincide. Bobby Kotick still has a job, but not for long. I've done some videos over this guy over the years. Yeah, it sucked that he stuck around. He was there to facilitate the Activision Blizzard merger, and that was all. And yeah, he's gonna be gone, but you know, for the things that he did, he should be in prison. So, you know, we can I guess celebrate if you want that he's gone, but the damage is done in all respects, both in terms of the environment that he fostered at Activision Blizzard, in terms of the people that, you know, he threatened and or assaulted at Activision Blizzard, and also the fact that he was successful in landing a merger that never should have been approved. They never should have been able to be acquired by Microsoft. Like, that's bad for the industry. That is some consolidation that's going to be bad news for the industry going forward. So, you know, fuck you on the way out, and, you know, more stuff that is redacted by terms of service. The Unity V's roller coaster. This was fascinating. John Riccatello, I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name or not, but this dude has always been like a villain. And it was interesting to see his name pop back up for like one of the most desperate acts of like money vacuuming that you can ever imagine you would see in today's day and age. Like, Unity doesn't strike me as a company that would be so desperate for money that they would have to like do something as wildly unpopular as announce those runtime fees. So in September, Unity announced a new and very disliked runtime fees that seem set to charge developers and publishers every time a person installed a game. That sounds desperate. Like, why were they? I don't think they were in that kind of financial trouble. I think that maybe, I'm not saying that they weren't in trouble. There was some reports that, you know, actually the reports that had come out around the time they made this announcement was that Unity had for the first time exited a quarter in the black. So, you know, they were actually trending upwards anyways, but, you know, I guess that wasn't fast enough or good enough for them. Worse, it appeared that this would be applied retroactively. So anybody who at any point in the past had installed a Unity game, all of those installation, you know, most of your, you know, iPhone games are built in Unity and shit. So all of those installs would, for all of those companies that released those games, retroactively hit. Oh, you built Flappy Bird in Unity and sold for how, I mean, those games were given away. Some of these games are free downloads on the App Store, but you sold, you know, 30 million copies of Flappy Bird. Well, that's 99 cents per 30 million copy installed. So you owe us that much money, which is absurd. It's absurd, you know. Even if it wasn't retroactive, it'd be absurd. But the fact that they tried to make it retroactive, I think, would almost constitute some level of criminality, and would even it would be applied retroactively and would count for even free-to-play games. Developers, as you might expect it, were very upset about this sudden change, and the backlash started instantly. About a week later, Unity had walked back most of the worst changes, saying it would not charge people for a runtime fee if they used the free version of Unity for smaller games with little to no revenue. Unity also walked back the original plan to charge these fees for all versions of the engine, confirming that only the latest edition would be charged runtime fees, and that devs could continue to use older copies of Unity without updating to avoid extra fees. These changes were far from perfect, but they did help calm a lot of anger. So basically, is this still in effect? Because that basically means that a lot of people aren't going to be updating to the latest Unity. Yeah, that was a real mess. It happened in the span of a week, but it seemed like a lot of shit was going on at that time. I mean, people were in a panic, and rightfully so. Like, this was like a direct threat to the existence of a lot of studios. Like, if they had to pay those fees, they would not be capable of opening their doors or keeping their doors open. Endless layoffs and studios closing. Now, this is a big deal. Last year, layoffs were a problem in the game industry, and this year they became an even bigger problem. I can't think of a year in which I saw more developers laid off than 2023. It's been practically a weekly occurrence during the most of the last 12 months. It got so bad I started losing track of all the layoffs that had happened. It had become a sad blur of people losing their jobs across dozens of studios and publishers. Over 6,000 developers have been laid off since January 2023. That's a big number that is hard to fully grok. I wonder how it spreads out. Epic laying off 16% of its workforce is going to make up a huge chunk of this 6,500. So I wonder how those layoffs spread out across the industry. A lot of these studios, yeah, a lot of these studios also shut down. That's a big number. That's a large grok. We also saw studios. We also saw studios shutting down, including Volition and Free Radical Design. So finding new work in the tumultuous industry just gets harder and harder as more and more people lose their jobs. I want to say things will get better, but I expect that in 2024 I'll be writing this list and adding a big section of layoffs again and again. I made a video some years ago saying that the video game industry is the best environment for an experimentation in creating a large network of worker-owned studios, worker-owned co-op game developers. As all of these major studios just lay off all of this talent, and then like the issue would be the funding, and I have ideas on how a fundraising mechanic can be procured as well. But as all of these studios lay off all of these talented, people, and this isn't new. This is just how it's been for 30 years or so. Like, you develop games, once the games ship, you get laid off. You hire someplace else, you work on their game ships, you get laid off. And if the game, or you don't get laid off, but the next game doesn't sell that well, so we gotta scale back. This game didn't sell well, so you over there who had nothing to do with that game, you're laid off now because you just need to cut your salary. Like, it's just how it happens. It's how it always goes. It's exclusively Western studios. Like, Japan doesn't really get into the layoff game. If a company doesn't do well financially, then that company just takes it in the stomach. And they're just like, well, it's a tough year this year. We may have to scale back some amenities. We might even have to scale back some of the pay. But, no one's losing their job. We're just gonna tighten the belt. We're gonna put our heads down. We're gonna soldier on. We'll find out what goes on next. But in the Western world, it's driven by there has been no section of labor more anarcho-capitalistic than the game industry. Which is what makes all the unionization interesting, because in the game industry, it's one or two dudes at the top. That's just they make the lion's share of the money. Like, nobody gets royalties or anything like that from game sales, except for the people at the very top. And you're lucky to be working for them, and that work can be terminated any moment for no good goddamn reason at all. And there's just a cycle of labor that comes in and out. So there's never any real, for any of these studios that's at least decent enough to kind of float, there's never really any real trepidation about losing talent, because you'll cycle new talent in. So as long as you can keep keep jobs coming in one capacity or another. A lot of game studios do co-development work for bigger studios. They're just little feeder fish. So Epic needs some UI work done, they'll go to a company that'll do UI work for them, and that same company will do networking work for some company that's making an online first-person shooter or something. And so long as that company can get that work, then they're not going to be too concerned about the amount of people that cycle in and out, because it's the game industry. Generally speaking, before the word got out on what working in the game industry is like, it was always easy to replace talent with, even if it's lesser talent, just so long as you get the job done. As that's these smaller studios. And a lot of smaller studios want to break out of that cycle and become, obviously, a bigger studio, a studio that releases their magnum opus to critical indie acclaim, and then they have the ability to kind of guide their own sales. But that's easier said than done. Until you can get to that point, you're going to be doing a lot of that stuff to keep yourself afloat. And, I think that in recent years, companies have gotten better. Once a lot of people left the game, a lot of people left the game industry, like myself. And I'm not saying that I'm one of these super talented people that whose departure from the industry really hurt the culture, really left a pain point. Not saying that at all, but a lot of people did leave. A lot of people more talented than me, and it gets harder and harder to start replacing that kind of talent. It gets harder and harder to convince people, hey, you know what? Come work for us. It's going to be a good time for you. When the word is out that your pay is going to be shit, and you're going to be working crunch hours, it's not going to be fun, and after you do all of this, you have a really strong likelihood of being laid off. That's a hard sell. So I think that studios are trying to compensate for that. I think they're offering better pay, generally speaking, and obviously unionization efforts are helping lead to a little bit more concessions. But I think that a lot of these people, a lot of this talent, they should try to make their own co-op. Worker owned co-op. They should try it's hard. It's a hard thing to do. It is easier said than done. I did a video over it. I interviewed a guy who in Austin operates. I don't know if they're still in operation. I guess I should look that up. Yeah, I did this video here. Are worker co-ops the future? A case for game industry revolution. I did that video. Yeah, Ted Anderson of Pixel Pushers Union 512. Talked with him about his experience as a member of a worker-owned co-op who released a game on Steam called Tonight We Riot. Working on a new title right now, but I haven't heard from them in a while, so it'd be interesting to do a follow-up, I guess. But I am a big advocate of all of these people. Instead of falling back into the cycle of getting hired at one of these companies, working on a new contract, getting the game released, and then getting laid off, and all this other stuff, instead of falling into that cycle again and again, break out of that cycle and create a new one. Create a new sub-industry, I guess. Digital stores closing, games disappearing. This has always been a big issue for me. The idea that any of these digital games that we buy, we have access to until whoever is running that store decides we don't have access to it anymore. And then all of a sudden it's gone. It's always been a problem with me. It's always been why I've been against the move to digital only. Because you don't own anything anymore. You rent. It's just a permanent rentership. And then all that money, and you don't get that money back or anything. You rent something for the cost of a purchase. You're renting a fucking $60 game, and then suddenly it disappears. It's not like they're gonna give you at least 30 of your dollars back because we took it off the store or we shut the store down. No, your money is just fucking gone. And whatever console you have that was digital only or whatever is paperweight now. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. So I'm actually thinking about getting back into physical collecting. The digital future is, well, not really the future anymore. We are living in the digital present as most people are buying games digitally in 2023. This would be fine if we could trust the companies behind these digital pieces of content and the stores they're available on, but of course we can't. In 2023, we saw a whole bunch of digital games and online-only titles die or get their termination dates announced. We also saw TV shows and movies removed from the digital stores. That's the Warner Brothers Discovery. Their famous onslaught of HBO Max titles that David Zaslav took to the tax office. As licenses expired and folks in charge decided to move on and screw all their customers in the process. Well, this was about screwing the people that put those shows together because it allowed them to not have to pay them residuals anymore. Of course, it sucks if you spent money on a game and then can no longer play it due to dead service, but it also makes it harder and harder to preserve video games for the future, meaning that decades of this art form run the risk of one day becoming inaccessible or unplayable. And while pirates, modders, and hackers can pick up some of the slack, it's not an ideal situation at all. That's true too. That was also, click out of that. That was also a news piece that came out not too long ago about an alarming 87% of retro games are being lost to time, which is a sad thing. That's really sad to think about. In the first study on commercially availability of classic games, only 13% have been preserved as of now. Oh, what a fucking bummer, man. What a bummer. And it's all, it is I remember there used to be arguments about whether or not video games are art. And I don't know if those arguments are still being had. I feel like in a lot of respects that door has been closed. Video games are art. They are, but and all art is capitalized in one respect or another, you know. I guess maybe capitalized isn't the right term for it. They're subject to the whims of the market in some regard, right? Like starving artists, huh? Like those artists don't want to starve. They would prefer to sell their work so they, wouldn't starve. They're starving because it's hard to put a proper value on a piece of art that an artist spends all their time putting together, and then they're like, okay, I need to pay rent, I need to feed people, and then somebody who doesn't have a proper sense of the value of that person's dedication of their time and whatnot, resources into creating that art, they look at it and they're like, man, that's way too much. It's just some paint on a canvas. Why would I spend that much money for paint on a canvas? I could do this myself, you know. So art has always been devalued in that particular respect, and at least in the traditional physical sense, there is that situation where you can have a Banksy or whatever, or the very classic, oh, if they die then it's going to be worth a lot. Well, you at least still have the physical thing there that peaks in value for some reason that may be beyond the control of the artist itself, right? You're not going to get that with these. Like, yes, video games are art. These are art forms. There's a lot of talented artists that, created this image here, this dude and the dragon on his back. They created the story that they're trying to tell with Yakuza. They created the mechanics that, you interact with a game world, so that the haptics and all of that, the feel that you get, the visceral nature of punching someone or smashing him with a bike or whatever, the feedback that you get from the game, and the game gets from you in a certain respect, when you're interacting with the controller and all of that are different forms of art. And it sucks that like that art is going to be lost in time, and that art also speaks to a culture at the time, right? So when you think about games that are popular in 1997 to 1999 or 2000, think about PlayStation. What were the games that were popular on the PlayStation in that time frame? Well, yeah, you had your Madden games, NCAA football, back when that franchise existed, and that speaks to part of the culture there too about why that franchise doesn't exist anymore. But you also had a boom of role playing games because of Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII popped off, and people were like, "Oh shit!" It turns out that dumb fucking Americans actually do like reading elaborate stories and role playing games and turn based menus and all of that. We thought they only liked to shoot gun and kick ball, but no, they like to do more than shoot gun and kick ball. And then so you had a huge dearth of like role playing games coming out on the PlayStation. Legend of Lagoon and Jade Cocoon and fucking all the Square games that normally probably wouldn't get released in America. Final Fantasy Tactics, Parasite Eve, and you had Chrono Cross, and Grandia came over, and any number of role playing games on the Legend of Legaia, Wild Arms, any number of role playing games on the PlayStation that I happen to be missing right now. Suikoden, of course. How could I forget my favorite role playing series, Suikoden and Suikoden 2, and all of that shit that just popped off in a way that probably wouldn't have if people at the time weren't super super jazzed about what Final Fantasy VII was and did for the genre. And people copied it, and there was some of those games were successful, some not. Some spoke to others more than others did. Like, to me, Suikoden remains supreme. Love that series. Can't wait for the new versions that's going to drop here in like a couple of months, I think. Oh, and Yuiden Chronicles, the spiritual successor to the Suikoden series, also drops in April this year, so I'm happy about that too. But all of that stuff is just reflective of the culture of the time, the shift in attitudes in gaming that was happening at that moment. And you could do a study on that shit and really get a fascinating read on how that moment influenced that generation of players. A lot of those games, those Japanese role-playing games, I gain a lot of my leftist perspective from Japanese role playing games, because they're all, and I guess maybe it's not super fair to credit specifically them for that sort of thing. Like there's always going to be rebels rising up against the evil empire, right? That's Star Wars. That's the hero's journey to a degree. But I mean, that's not Call of Duty. Call of Duty, you're the military industrial complex led evil empire in those games. You're in your fucking fatigue going to some Middle Eastern country blowing away brown people or whatever. And so there is a different vibe there. There is a different zeitgeist. And a lot of those games that I grew up playing, those role playing games, they instilled in me the concept of, the scrappy band of rebels for one reason or another. They were always more political than Star Wars was, because Star Wars was, it's like a 2-hour movie, and it was fun and cool, and I liked it. But I played Suikoden for like fucking 60 hours, I watched the rise and fall of the Scarlet Moon Empire in the first one. And then I went back to the Scarlet Moon Empire, which they called the Toran Republic. The Toran Republic in Suikoden 2. So they weren't an empire anymore. It was just a republic. And you saw the president, who was a dude who was in your party in the first game. He's now the president of the republic in the second. It's like, oh, the politics have changed. How did the politics of the Toran Republic relate to the politics of the Dunnan Republic? Like, Dunnan was different. In the first Suikoden game, those two sides, the Scarlet Moon Empire and the Dunnan, I guess it was called the Joustin Alliance, actually. The Dunnan Republic formed after the war in Suikoden 2. But in Suikoden 1, there was the Joustin Alliance, which were an alliance of city-states that basically, had trade agreements with one another and kind of operated as independent city-states, right? Like the city itself was its own state government. And on their border was the Scarlet Moon Empire. They had a history of warring with one another, border scrimmages. They just did not like each other at all. And eventually, after the fall of the Scarlet Moon Empire, it brought rise to the Toran Republic, and they had their own internal conflicts to deal with after the fall of the Empire. But they did allow themselves to tacitly ally with the Joustin Alliance, as the alliance was forming a more unified army against the Highland Kingdom. So Suikoden 2 is a war between the Highland Kingdom and the Joustin city-states. But the Joustin city-states were so disjointed and disorganized that they could not form a unified front against the Highland Kingdom. So the Highland Kingdom just barnstormed through the Joustin states and was conquered Muse, conquered North Window, conquered South Window. They were just moving all the way through, almost conquered Two River, and they did, I think, get Green Hill. But, they were just moving all the way through, and they just had no resistance because the city-state, they couldn't agree to anything. And some parts of the city-state, like Rockland, were, bought off by the kingdom and ended up betraying the other city-states. And it was a mess. And the only unification that happened was from the main character, of Suikoden 2, building his own little party, his own little alliances here and there, and then going and liberating these towns that the kingdom took over. And as the liberation grows and rolls from town to town, the army more formalizes, and eventually what happens is, at the end of that game, that rebellion army, that rebellious uprising that was built to liberate those cities from the Highland Kingdom, end up becoming the nucleus that transforms the loose alliance of the Joustin city-states into what is then called the Dunnan Republic. So they become a more formalized country with their own standing army. And it encapsulates the Highland Kingdom too, because eventually, once they liberate all their towns, they move into Highland territory and basically just take over Highland as well. So Highland's gone by the end of Suikoden 2, and it's all Dunnan Republic. It's a fascinating political story. And a lot of that informed, mixing that into the Final Fantasy VII. Basically, you're in that game, you're playing the role of an eco-terrorist. And, it instilled in me, okay, major corporations that suck resources from the planet to the detriment of the planet and the well-being of people that rely on those resources, for their own personal profit. These guys are the bad guys. Full stop. They're the bad guys. They must be stopped. Like all of these things kind of bled into, my dumb brain at that time. I'd just been watching Dragon Ball Z and reading X-Men comics, although X-Men comics also played their role too. Helped form all of these different thoughts and ideas and whatnot. And I think that speaks a lot to a lot of people in this who are in my age cohort as well. And it sucks that, there are also similar things happening to, kids in their teens and whatnot. If they're 14 years old, circa 2002, games that speak to them about, the world that they live in. Kids who are 14, 15 right now, games that they play that speak to the world they live in. It really sucks that that's not going to be preserved for people to go back and look at and talk about and experience for themselves. It's hard to do, but you can still find copies of Suikoden and Final Fantasy VII and play them. I know now that it's mostly digitally available, but again, how long is that going to last? How long is the digital preservation of those games going to last? So it always sucks. And I had Final Fantasy VII digitally on my PlayStation 3. But my PlayStation 3 broke, and then shortly after that, Sony was like, all right, we're killing the PlayStation Store on the PlayStation 3. And I was like, wait, I have a lot of games on the PlayStation Store on PlayStation 3. What happens to those games? Like, do I just not have them anymore? The answer to that question is yes. So it's like, this is bullshit. Like, this is bullshit. I had so many games that I purchased digitally on the PlayStation Store for my PlayStation 3. That's why I haven't really done it on the PlayStation 4. Most of my PlayStation 4 games are physical games. And when Microsoft first announced their plan to make the Xbox, I guess, series, I can't remember which one it was, the Series 1S or X or whatever, they wanted to make it digital only, and there was a lot of backlash over it. I remember the game studio I was working on at the time, the general thought was, people need to get over it because this is just going to be the future, blah, 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 blah. And I get that too, but again, I fully side with the people that were in uproar over it for these very reasons. So, yeah, this sucks. And I don't foresee it getting any better in the future. I wish there were better ways to preserve physical copies of these games. Hopefully, something happens in the near future that makes it more possible, but I just don't see that happening. AI nonsense replacing NFTs. Yeah, this is a bummer. Remember how silly and dumb the NFT fad was? In hindsight, I wish that had succeeded and delayed the new tech bro grift AI bullshit. AI is already taking jobs, making it harder for artists to make a living, and filling the already filled with garbage internet with more gunk. Xbox getting AI generated content, and it sounds like hell. On November 6th, the company announced a new business deal to bring AI generated non-player characters and more to the platform. The tool will be optional for developers. I'm sure this will all go perfectly. Remember Microsoft's Bing showing Kirby doing 9/11? What? Oh, that's awesome. So it was Kirby. It was Kirby all along. Microsoft announced a partnership with startup InWorld's AI over on its website, stating that the deal would help it build tools for AI-generated dialogue and narrative at scale. One of these tools is an AI-designed copilot that will let developers type in prompts and have these creative ideas turned into detailed scripts, dialogue trees, quests, and more. The second tool is an AI character runtime engine that is integrated directly into the game client to generate stories, quests, and dialogue completely on the fly. Now that's gonna suck. The first part, I don't mind. The first part, I think, is going... This is the kind of... Well, I do mind that InWorld is entering a partnership with Microsoft. I would prefer that InWorld... And I played InWorld's AI detective game that kind of showcases their tool. And, it was all right. It was all right. It wasn't the worst in the world, but and it definitely could use some improvements, but, that's going to happen over time. I would prefer if they just allowed themselves to operate independently and license their shit out to whoever wants to use it, rather than being in some specific partnership with Microsoft. Because how is this going to affect, like, an indie studio that wants to use it? Do they have to use Microsoft's toolkit to use it? Like, because in my view, you can have a small studio that uses the tool in this regard, AI Copilot that allow developers to have creative ideas and detailed scripts, all that. Like, you could use that to do a lot of the perfunctory tasks that, takes up so much of the labor load for AAA blockbuster games, and you could have a smaller team build a bigger game. So this can actually help, indie developers compete with big time AAA studios if they have, fair access to it. The second part, though, that sounds shitty. Generate stories, quests, and dialogues completely on the fly. Yeah, that's not going to end well. Video games keep failing women. Yeah, I mean, I don't, in what regard? Stop, you've heard this before. A big video game industry event happens, and afterwards people go, wait, did that whole show not include a single woman? You'd think in 2023 things would be better, and I guess by the lowest standards they are, but the reality is that we are still dealing with this shit. As we reported, Summer Game Fest was all men, though host Jeff Keighley, why does he keep showing up in these, claimed that wasn't the plan. They had a woman last year set to show up, but she couldn't make it. Maybe next year. I don't know what Summer Game Fest is. Like, they had a woman. Wait, what does that even mean? What does this mean? What is this about? Is this just wait, what? Is this just about, like, whether they had, like, a woman presenter or something? Or what? Like, on that respect, who fucking cares? Like, I don't think anyone's really paying that much attention to Summer Game Fest anyways. Like, sure, I guess it would be cool if they had a woman presenter, but what difference would it make in the grand scheme of things? Like, I think it'd be more important to have women in the industry. Throughout 2023, we watched again and again as gamers in their industry treated women like crap. Yeah, that's the more important part. You should lead with this one. Yeah, don't lead with fucking, hey, that thing that not very many people pay attention to didn't have a woman doing something inconsequential and time-wasty. Like, lead with this one. This is the important one. When we wrote about how most Switch owners, according to data, are women, the comments were filled with men explaining that actually the moms are buying the consoles. What? What does that even mean? That's not how that data is collected. This was false, as the data was about people who buy and play the Switch, you weird losers. Yeah, it's like the play part is the relevant part. When PC Gamer wrote up a big anniversary post about its 30-year history, it failed to include one woman contributor or writer in a massive list. I mean, I'm not familiar with PC Gamer. I would imagine they would have had to have had some women contributing over 30 years. I think that would be pretty telling if they didn't have any women contributing over 30 years, but if they did, then it's also telling that they didn't give, a single one a shout out, I guess. Everything costs more and more. I mean, this is just a bummer across the board for everyone. Look around you and you'll notice that, man, things cost more today than they did a year or two ago. I mean, that's how, general inflation usually tends to be, but it definitely skyrocketed these past few years. Consoles are more expensive, V-Bucks are pricier to purchase, subscription services are also going up and up, and then they're making you watch fucking ads on top of it. Then you have the continued trend of $70 games, blatantly overpriced cosmetics, and publishers holding games hostages for a week unless you pay them an extra $20 to play early. Yeah, that's true. I bought into that. It truly feels like every video game, app, store, and company is trying to squeeze more and more pennies out of my pocket with each passing week. Sure, the folks in charge will blame inflation, but inflation plays outside of the game industry, inflation plays a small part. What it really is price gouging, and it's price gouging in the game industry as well. It's extreme price gouging across the board. Sure, the folks in charge blame inflation, but it's funny how when the company is doing better, the prices don't go down. Everything just keeps going up. You can't even argue that the price increases help make stores and shops better places to visit or use, as it just sucks buying anything anywhere in 2023. Not only that, but it's not like, they're raising prices, but they aren't keeping their workforce around. It's not like they're raising prices and, oh, by the way, you still have a job here. No, they're laying people off left and right while also increasing the prices of everything, and then celebrating when they post their yearly profits. This disappointment list is a lot longer than the surprise list. I guess 2023 must have been a real bummer year for at least the Kotaku staff. This is a bummer of a story, but I think I only remembered a piece of it. I don't actually know what this is about. In January, popular Twitch streamer Brandon Atriok Ewing accidentally revealed that he was viewing deepfake porn during a live stream. Okay, I do remember this. The site he had visited had a similar format to OnlyFans. Different content creators could create their own pages and require visitors to pay a subscription fee to view their content. Ewing wasn't just viewing deepfake porn, which edits people's faces onto existing pornographic content, but deepfake porn of his female peers, some of whom he is friends with in real life. Now that's weird. I don't know how I mean, you've got to be kind of fucked up to like be okay with that. You know, it's yeah, that's just fucked up. After accidentally telling on himself, Ewing issued a tearful apology and left the streaming services until March, when he popped back up to assure people he was working hard to combat the porn he himself appeared to be. Working hard to combat the porn he himself appeared to be. What? At least that one time watching. Oh, okay. A week after the event, the first thing I did was wire Morrison Rothman, an LA-based law firm, about $60,000 to cover any woman on Twitch who wanted to use their legal services for DMCA takedowns or reputation management. He said during the stream, Kotaku confirmed with the firm that Ewing had indeed sent the retainer. Whoever is responsible for creating that should be held criminally liable, right? Like there's something. It's almost like revenge porn, but it's not. It's like, because revenge porn assumes something that the victim may have consented to at the time, but doesn't consent to the disclosure of, at the moment of disclosure, right? Like it implies at least some level of participation from that person. And there is no level of participation. This is it's almost like revenge porn meets libel. That was a lot of disappointments, man. 2023 sounds like it was a real bummer ass year.